If you're like most people, you've never heard the term digital certificate or particularly X.509 certificate. But just by browsing to this video, several of them were involved under the hood. Now, maybe you've heard the term digital certificate or X.509 certificate, and you are aware that these are somehow important for securing web traffic, but you aren't exactly sure how they are used to secure web traffic. Well, I'm here to try to demystify that. But before you can understand the whole thing about website security, you have to understand what the digital certificate itself is. So today, I'm going to explain X.509 certificates starting from the very beginning.
Let's start at the very beginning.
Stop that. You're not going into a song while I'm here.
Most people have a basic understanding of encryption. You start with some plain text, you apply an encryption algorithm, and generate ciphertext. Ideally, the ciphertext should be indistinguishable from random noise. The best way to do this is to mix the plain text with an actual set of random data. This is called a one-time pad because the random data was traditionally written down on a pad of paper. In order to decipher the ciphertext back into plain text, the recipient needs to unmix the ciphertext from the same stream of random noise that was used to encrypt it. In the case of a one-time pad, this means having a second copy of the sender's pad. The benefit of a one-time pad is that the cryptography cannot be broken. The problem is how to securely distribute the pads, especially when the correspondents use them up. A fix for this is to use an algorithm that generates an infinite series of data that appears random but is actually predictable if you know the key that was used to initialize it. In this case, the sender and receiver need only to exchange this key, after which they may exchange any amount of ciphertext. You are still left with the challenge of securely exchanging the keys, and it goes without saying that the two parties in the exchange must have an established relationship. But what if I want to securely communicate with somebody I've never met, like a new e-commerce site I might want to buy something from? What we've been discussing are symmetric ciphers because the sender and receiver need to have the same secret value, whether that's a pad of data or a key to drive an algorithm. There is a class of algorithms that have two different keys instead of a single key. I now have a key pair. One is usually called the private key, and the other is usually called the public key for reasons that will become clear. Let's say I generate a key pair. I keep one private, obviously the private key, and I send you the other key, the public key. Although you have this key, you can't figure out what the private key is. So what can you do with it? You can use the public key to encrypt a message, which only the private key can decrypt. Even if someone else gets a hold of the public key, they can't decipher the message that you sent me. That means that I can send you the public key and you can send me a secure message without us having any relationship. Most importantly, I don't need to find a secure way to provide you with the public key. And that's why we call it the public key. I can broadcast it publicly to anyone, and anyone can use it to send me a secure message. It also works in reverse. If I encrypt something with my private key, then someone with the public key can decrypt it. This is how digital signatures work. Let's say that I want to send you a software package, and you need to make sure that it actually came from me and hasn't been altered by a malicious third party. To ensure this, I take a SHA-256 hash of the package and I encrypt it with my private key. You get the file and the encrypted hash. Using my public key, you decrypt the hash and compare it with your own hash computation of the file. If they match, then the file was sent by me and was not altered. You know this because only someone with my private key could have encrypted the hash in a way that you could decrypt it with my public key. Now, before you dive into the comments, I should mention that digital signatures use different mathematical operations than encryption. The math still maintains a connection between the public and private key, allowing a secure verification, but it's not technically accurate to say that it's encryption. I just don't want to go into the math. You probably don't either. It should come as no surprise that asymmetric encryption is the basis for cryptocurrencies. If I want to pay you some Bitcoin, for example, I publish a transaction that says to transfer that amount from my wallet address to your wallet address. This transaction is signed by my private key, linked to my wallet address. My public key is included in the transaction. Now, millions of people who have no idea who I am, including you possibly, can update the blockchain to reflect the balance transfer, and no central authority is needed to facilitate this. While it can be possible to connect a wallet address to a person, it doesn't really matter. All that matters is that you got the Bitcoin. Maybe you know it came from me, but if it came from someone else, you still got paid. Cryptocurrency transactions are inherently public, but what if you go back to the original problem, exchanging secure messages? If you're going to send me a secure message, then you probably don't know who I am. You have a public key, but how can you be confident that it's my public key? What if you are sending messages to a third party who is decrypting them, reading them, and then encrypting them with my real public key and sending them to me? This is called a man-in-the-middle attack. How do you fix that? Don't think about it too much, because you can't. It doesn't really matter if the two parties swap public keys. There's nothing you and I can do to thwart a man-in-the-middle attack unless we get to know each other. In that case, we could just exchange a key for a symmetric cipher and call it a day. This was a challenge faced by the International Telecommunications Union, or ITU. Since 1947, the ITU has served as the technology standards agency for the United Nations. They had developed an email system standard called X.509. You've probably never used or even heard of an X.509-based email system because by the time email went mainstream, simpler internet-based protocols had won out. Like most standards developed by a committee, X.509 was over-engineered and incomprehensible. For obvious reasons, it lost out to RFC 821, which was published 2 years later. RFC 821 introduced the simple mail transfer protocol, which I can explain in about 10 minutes, maybe in another video. After churning out X.509, the ITU asked the question, how do you find someone's email address? And how do you verify the identity of someone with whom you are exchanging emails? If you're wondering why these seem like important issues for email, remember that this was 1988, nearly a decade before the internet became publicly accessible. At that time, emails were exchanged within organizations. In a very large organization, it would make sense to maintain a giant directory of email users. This directory could also attach a public key to each user, providing a way for members of the organization to authenticate themselves using strong cryptography. The directory system and the authentication technology was defined in another set of overcomplicated standards called X.500. Among these standards was X.509, a definition of something called a digital certificate. The essential function of an X.509 certificate was to connect a name with a public key. In order to make this association authoritative, the certificate is digitally signed. The private key used to sign is owned by a certificate authority. You can get the associated public key of that certificate authority in another X.509 certificate. How do you know that the certificate authority certificate is valid? Well, you just have to trust them. In fact, a certificate authority, or CA, represents a trusted third party in this scenario. The idea is that a CA verifies the association between the public key and an entity before agreeing to certify that association by signing an X.509 certificate. A CA can sign hundreds, thousands, or even millions of X.509 certificates. If you trust the certificate authority to do their job, then you can trust an X.509 certificate that they have signed. A user can verify a certificate they receive against a trust store of trusted CA certificates. There's a lot more detail about how certificates are issued, validated, and revoked. The processes and technologies surrounding this enterprise is called a public key infrastructure, or PKI. For example, validating an X.509 certificate may require following a chain of certificates back to the root certificate published by the CA. Like all ITU standards, X.509 was complicated, and building a PKI around it was difficult and expensive, particularly in 1988. As a way of exchanging public keys, it could have lost to a simpler and cheaper alternative, Pretty Good Privacy, or PGP. PGP solved the same problems as X.509, but didn't require a ponderous organizational infrastructure. Instead of centralized corporate certificate authorities, PGP authenticated the identity of a key holder using a community-based web of trust. PGP was created in 1991 before the public internet, and it was intended to give everyone a way of encrypting their data in order to keep it private. When the internet opened to the public, data privacy became more important than ever. If the main question faced by new users was how do I keep unauthorized parties from reading my email, then PGP would reign supreme today. In fact, it's still used widely for email encryption. But another pressing question emerged. Is it safe to send my credit card to this website? In 1995, Netscape, the maker of the first widely adopted web browser, set out to solve the problem of securing web traffic with a protocol called Secure Sockets Layer, or SSL. SSL had to do more than just encrypt data in transit. It also had to ensure that the encrypted data was being sent to the right recipient. While SSL was new, its trust model was built on an existing standard, X.509. And that's the subject of the next video.